Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Reshma. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Student Development and Leadership Coordinator in the Office of Student Life. Welcome to today's workshop, Plant-Based Eden and Its Benefits, presented by Noah and Roxanne, who also goes by Dr. Roxy. They're from a nonprofit organization called Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to speak to you today. So when I share my screen, if you have your phone with you, then I'd encourage you to go ahead and scan this QR code. We're going to have a few questions scattered throughout the presentation, just to keep it a bit more interactive, and all the answers will remain anonymous through Menti for when you're voting for the answers. So I hope you're all comfortable with that. If you're not comfortable participating, that's absolutely fine as well. But if you are, go ahead and scan that QR code. You will also find the code and menti.com, the details in the chat. So if you missed this QR code or you need to rejoin later, then you can join using that code. Looks like my internet might not be the greatest, so please just let me know if I cut out. All right, so today we're speaking about good nutrition for optimal health, specifically focusing on plant-based nutrition. And we're from the Physicians Committee, which is a nonprofit focused on plant-based nutrition research and education. And we do a lot of these lunch and learns. And so this is just a welcome and an introduction to plant-based nutrition. And then I believe there will be further detailed lectures in the future. So I'm Dr. Roxy Becker. I'm a physician trained in South Africa, so that's where the accent is coming from, but I'm currently living locally in DC. And Noah Promsma is one of the registered dietitians from the Physicians Committee, so he'll be speaking a bit later. So if you scan that code, you should see that these lecture slides pop up on your phone as well, or you can use your laptop or computer. But the first question is going to be, what habits help us to live a long and healthy life? So the first question I'm going to ask you to vote on is, have you heard of the blue zones? Now you should get two little options popping up on your phones where you are able to vote. All right, it looks like that's coming in great. If you have any problems with that, let us know in the chat. And it seems like some people have, seems like most of you haven't. All right, so the blue zones, for those who haven't heard of it, are places in the world where they are the most centenarian. So the most people that are living to be 100 years or older. And when it comes to health and longevity, there really are two things that we're focused on. The first is living many years, living a long life, so a long lifespan. But the second thing is having a good health span. So you're not living to 100, but for the last 40 years of your life, you're taking 20 different drugs, you're spending more time in hospitals than you are at home, but you're living a healthy life. And so in the blue zones, that's what people do. And they're focused around four core areas. The first is to move naturally and exercise. The second is to connect, so to have a sense of community, close relationships with your family. The third is to have a positive outlook, to have some sense of purpose in your life, whatever that is or whatever that means to you. And then the fourth component is the food and what we're eating every day. So let's take a look at what some of these healthiest, longest living communities are eating. The first blue zone is right here in the US, in Loma Linda, California. And if we look at the foods that they eat every day, around a third of their nutrition comes from vegetables, around a third comes from fruits. Then we have some beans, legumes, soy, 10% comes from dairy, whole grains, a little bit of meat and poultry, nuts and seeds. But really, when we're looking at animal products, meat, eggs, and dairy, these foods really aren't the center of their dishes. They're more an extra or garnishing rather than the main focus. If we look at Icaria Greece, excuse me, we see that again, lots of vegetables, greens, fruits, beans, potatoes, olive oil. Around 6% of their calories come from fish, 5% from meat. That's very different than the normal plates we see now, where it's a big steak in the middle or the center or a big burger or something. So really, we're seeing that they're focusing on plant-based foods. If we look at Okinawa, Japan, we see that around 2/3 of their daily nutrition is coming from the Japanese sweet potato and lots of rice. You're seeing lots of carbohydrates here, vegetables, beans, other grains, and really such a small percent of their diet comes from fish and meat and dairy and poultry and those sorts of foods. And these are the people that are living the longest and healthiest lives. So what do we recommend at the Physicians Committee? A lot of our work is focused around research, both clinical research, where we have people come in and we do clinical trials, changing their diets. We also do research where we review other evidence and we write up position papers. And what do we recommend after seeing all of this research? Well, we say that around 80% of your nutrition should come from carbohydrates, which may seem a little different than what you might be hearing on social media, where a lot of these low-carb diets are very prominent and being promoted. We recommend only getting around 10% of your calories from fat and only around 10% from protein. So in terms of the types of food, we say eat abundantly from whole grains. So these are things like brown rice and quinoa, legumes, so your lentils, chickpeas, beans, those sorts of foods. Soy also falls under there, fruits and vegetables. And then nuts and seeds are in a yellow-orange color. If your goal is weight loss, we recommend eating these because they're really healthy. Lots of omega-3s, minerals like your zinc and magnesium, but they are very calorie dense. So it is very easy to get a lot of calories from a very small amount of nuts and seeds. So eat abundantly from this list, and then limit or avoid meat, eggs, and dairy, so the animal products, ultra-processed foods, which I'll touch on in a second, oils, especially your tropical oils, so coconut oil and palm oil. These are very high in saturated fat. You'll find them in a lot of ingredients of processed foods. And then, of course, alcohol, which we don't go into too much detail for this specific lecture, but we also recommend limiting or avoiding alcohol. So now you might look at that list and think, okay, does that leave me with just rabbit food and lettuce? Well, no. Plant-based foods can be absolutely delicious. You can make plant-based pastas, vegan sushi, antioxidant-rich smoothies, baked potato skins, curries, dals, and all of these recipes are on our website, and Noah's going to go into a bit more detail about the food. But why do we recommend eating plant-based foods like this? Because we've seen it works according to the science. So let's take a look at the top 10 causes of death in the United States. We have heart disease, which is number one. I think it's been number one for many decades. The leading killer in the United States is heart disease. Second, it's cancer. This data is a little old. It's from 2021. So more recently, COVID is now number 4 and accidents is number 3. We have stroke. We have lung diseases like emphysema and chronic bronchitis, Alzheimer's, diabetes, liver disease, and kidney disease. So these are the diseases that you're most likely to get as you get older. So take a look at this list, and I want you to just think, how many of these diseases do you think are related to nutrition and the food that we eat every single day? Well, it's pretty much all of them. And if you include alcohol, then accidents are also related to alcohol and nutrition. But really what we've seen is heart disease, cancer, infectious diseases, chronic diseases, brain, heart, lungs, all of these are all influenced by the food that we're eating every single day. So if we jump into a bit of the science and we start with heart disease, cardiovascular disease, I just see, did you say slides will be made available? Absolutely. You don't have to take screenshots or notes. You guys will get these slides afterwards. So a meta-analysis is a type of study where we take a whole bunch of different studies and we pull all the people together, all the results together. So instead of just having a small study, we can actually look at the results of hundreds of thousands of people and make it very generalizable to the population. So this study looked at over 600,000 people from different studies around the world, over 100,000 cases of heart disease, and they looked at diet. And if people eat a non-vegetarian diet, eat meat, eggs, and dairy, or if they eat a vegan diet, how does that influence their risk of getting heart disease? And we see that if non-vegetarians are the base, people who ate a vegan diet had an 18% lower risk of getting heart disease. And in the case of established heart disease, this is a clinical trial where nearly 200 people were put on a low-fat vegan diet. So 10% of calories coming from fat, eating lots of grains, beans, fruits, vegetables. And then some of them had angiograms. So this is when we take a catheter, a small tube, we put it in the groin and we thread it up to the heart and we inject a dye so that we can see what the arteries look like. And this is a picture of one of the main arteries in the heart. It's actually called the Widowmaker, which is quite a morbid name, but it's called that because if you get a heart attack in this artery, your chance of survival is extremely low. And so this is the artery over here that you're seeing in white. And you'll see that almost looks like something's gone and taken bites out of here, out of the wall. Almost looks like something's eaten away at that. And what that is plaque sitting in the arteries, in the walls of the arteries. It's actually pushing and narrowing that artery. So you can see it should look smooth and wide like this, but it actually gets very narrow as you go down it. So this is one example of someone who followed this low-fat vegan diet for 32 months. And they repeated it and they found that without using any kind of statin or cholesterol medication, that this artery was actually, it looks like it's opened up and it looks like that plaque has actually regressed. So it went from being super narrow to super wide. And there are a couple other examples of these before and afters that you can find on the internet as well. And it's just crazy that if heart disease is the leading cause of death in America, if diet could potentially reverse this heart disease, don't you think that this should be the default diet of all Americans? If we could prevent, if we go back to around 18% lower risk of heart disease, and we're seeing that around 700,000 deaths are from heart disease every year. Imagine if we could prevent around 20% of those. All right, so the next question is about diabetes. So what is some of the nutrition advice that you've heard about diabetes? And there should be a little block where you can fill in, you can type out your answers. Maybe it's something you have heard through university if you're studying nutritional medicine. Maybe it's something you've heard on social media. Maybe it is advice that you've heard being given to loved ones, or you've heard if you've been to see a doctor. We're seeing avoid high sugar foods. Don't eat too much candy, rice, potatoes, watch sugar intake, lose weight, keto, intermittent fasting. Love these, keep them coming. The pancreas does not produce enough insulin. Absolutely, that does become a problem. That is a problem with type 1. It becomes a problem later on with type 2 diabetes. High carb diets are bad, right? Limit your carbs. This is very commonly what we hear being given. But really, the research might surprise you that this is not the case. So this is the Adventist Health Study done on Seventh-day Adventists here in America. And they took people, followed them up for around a decade or so and looked at their different diets. And they divided them into non-vegetarians, so eat meat, eggs, and dairy, semi-vegetarians, where people eat meat once or less than once per week, pesco vegetarians eat fish, eggs, and dairy. Vegetarians eat dairy and eggs. And then vegans obviously exclude all of those animal products. And again, focus on grains, beans, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. And they found that there was almost a step-like reduction in risk as people eliminated animal products from their diet. And people who followed a vegan diet had less than half the risk of developing diabetes compared to people who ate meat, eggs, and dairy every day. And we see this pattern very similarly with BMI, for example, in the same study. Those who followed a vegan diet were the only group that had a normal BMI. The rest were all considered overweight. And we see that as people follow vegan diets, the risk of other chronic diseases is also reduced. So this is an example of one of the studies that we've done at the Physicians Committee. We do a lot of studies on diabetes because it's so common in America. And what we did was we took 99 people, split them in half. We said half of you are going to follow a low-fat vegan diet, 80% carbohydrates, even though you have diabetes, and it's not what people think they should be doing with diabetes. And half of you are going to follow what the American Diabetes Association recommends, and that's portion control. So, of course, limit the junk food and the fast food, but eat everything else and just control the amount of calories so that you're trying to lose weight and you're trying to eat less. So that's what these two groups of people did. After 11 weeks, you'll see the people in blue are the people that followed the plant-based diet. And here specifically, we're looking at A1C. So this is a blood test that gives us an indication of your blood sugar control over the last 3 months. And if it's normal, it should be below 5.7, right? That's if you don't have diabetes or pre-diabetes, it should be below 5.7. And then you get pre-diabetes and diabetes. These people all had diabetes, starting with above 8, which really is not a good number. And it reduced to around 7.2 after 11 weeks, whereas the pink or red, whatever color it's coming up on your screen as, this is the ADA, the American Diabetes Association's diet. And you see that they also improved their blood sugar control, but not quite as much as people who followed the plant-based diet. And then after 22 weeks, you can see that those who followed the ADA diet sort of plateaued, maybe got a little bit worse, still better than they were. But those who followed the low-fat vegan diet continued to improve, reaching nearly a pre-diabetes range and heading towards normal. And, you know, it's crazy. Some of the individual results I've seen have just blown my mind. People have halved their A1Cs, reversed their diabetes, not on medication, all while eating more carbohydrates than ever before. But these are coming from whole foods again. This is not white bread and white pasta. We're talking about fruits, vegetables, brown rice, beans, that sort of thing. All right, so our next question for you is going to be, which of these foods have you heard have been linked to an increased risk of cancers? Can be any type of cancer. You can select as many as you like. There are processed meat, red meat, dairy, whole grains, ultra-processed foods, soy. Which of these have been linked to an increased risk of cancer? We're seeing a lot of people say processed meat, dairy, ultra-processed foods, red meat. No votes for whole grains. All right, that's good. That makes me happy. I'm glad you guys have not heard that. And a couple of votes for soy. All right. Let's jump into meat first. So red and processed meat are the food groups that have most strongly been linked to different types of cancer, especially processed meat and the risk of colorectal cancer. And red and processed meat increase the risk of colorectal cancer specifically because they contain cancer-causing compounds. And they're very long names that will not be in the test. You don't have to remember them, but heterocyclic amines, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, all of these things form when meat is being cooked and processed. And when you eat these foods, those cancer-causing compounds get released from the food and they directly attack the cells lining your stomach, lining your colon, your small intestine. And when the DNA in these cells gets damaged, that's when we see cancer forms. We've also seen that the heme iron, the type of iron you find in meat, increases the risk of cancer. And it also increases chronic inflammation in the body, which is part of the way in which it increases the risk of other cancers. So breast cancer, endometrial cancer, which is the lining of the uterus, lung cancer, liver cancer, kidney cancer, all of these are increased by red and processed meat. I see a question, are hot dogs processed meat? Absolutely. So this is from around 2015. The World Health Organization and the IARC, the International Agency on Research in Cancer, they put together that long list of which foods and exposures cause cancer. And they came out after they'd assessed all the research, and they said that processed meats are classified as group 1, which means we have enough evidence to say for certain that these foods cause cancer. Cigarettes are also in this category. It's not the same level of risk. So smoking cigarettes and eating processed meat is not the same level of risk, but we have enough data to say for certain that these foods cause cancer. These are hot dogs, bacon, salami, deli meats, ham, all of those things that have been smoked and cured and have a lot of ingredients added to extend their shelf life. These are processed meats. Red meat over here is a group 2A, which means it probably causes cancer. We don't quite have as much data to say 100% for certainty that it causes cancer, but these should be really, really limited or not included in the diet at all. And this includes things like anything coming from a mammal, pork, beef, lamb, dogs, horses, donkeys. All of those foods are red meats. White meat is not yet on this list. They haven't included it anyway, so they haven't said white meat is ruled out, that it doesn't cause cancer, but they also haven't said that it does cause cancer. So the jury's still out on white meat. If you look at our website, the Physicians Committee, pcrm.org, you'll see we have a whole page on chicken, and there are cancer-causing compounds in chicken, but they haven't been added to this list yet. All right, so a quick note on ultra-processed foods. There are varying degrees of processing, and you'll see that this classification can change depending on where you get this from. Unprocessed is the way we find it in the wild, the way we would pick it from our garden, so a potato. Minimally processed is, for example, if you cook it, you boil, bake it, there are not really many things added, not many ingredients added. It still looks like it did when you got it from the wild, or if you had some apples and you cooked them a bit, to add on to a dessert or something, that would be minimally processed. Highly processed is, for example, you've taken this potato now, instead of just baking it and eating it like that, you've now chopped it, you've deep fried it, you've added a whole bunch of different spices and ingredients. This also includes pickled vegetables, for example. And then finally, ultra processed is kind of made from, it's not really made from a potato, but you've gone and extracted the starch from the potato. You've added fats and other ingredients and preservatives and all of that. And now you have an ultra-processed food. And really, we can say that these are food-like substances. They should not be considered food. And the general rule of thumb is that the more processed a food is, the less you should eat it, right? There are some exceptions to this. For example, soy milk is highly processed, but that actually reduces the risk of certain cancers. Whole grain bread made from whole grains is going to be higher on the process scale, but we've actually seen that that can improve outcomes, especially if it's replacing something like white bread. But generally speaking, we want to keep our foods coming from unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Now we've seen that when people eat more processed foods, so think that highly processed and ultra processed right at the end of that scale, their risk of all cancers increases. And this is another meta-analysis, so one of those massive studies that combined all the results from different studies, and it found that a 10% increase in calories, your daily calories, from ultra-processed foods was associated with a 13% increased risk of total cancers. What does that look like in food? Because we don't really measure things in 10% of our daily calories unless you're tracking your calories or you're into fitness. Well, average person tends to eat around 2,000 calories a day, generally speaking, and 10% of that is 200 calories. Now, a chocolate glazed Dunkin' donut is around 360 calories, so less than a donut a day. If you eat that much, or that equivalent of ultra-processed foods, is going to be associated with an increased risk of cancer. Some people voted that they have heard that soy increases the risk of cancer, and I'm not surprised, right? Because soy contains estrogens. And as soon as people hear the word estrogens, they think breast cancer, they think bad, we shouldn't be putting extra estrogens into our body. But actually, the form of estrogens, called phytoestrogens or plant estrogens, are structurally different from the estrogens that we produce in our body, and they actually have kind of the opposite effect in our body. So this is another meta-analysis. We're doing lots of these big studies, and if you see here, the risk of 1, so this is a baseline. Anything less than 1 means the risk is reduced. Anything above 1 means the risk is increased. And aside from this outlier study from 1992, all the other research here has found that the more soy foods that women eat, the lower their risk of breast cancer. So this is looking at breast cancer. And it found that 25 milligrams of isoflavones, which are a type of plant estrogens, that were eaten per day, which is the equivalent of around 3.5 ounces of tofu, 1 cup of soy milk a day, was associated with a 30% lower risk of breast cancer. And specifically in women, the earlier you start eating soy products, especially if it's in adolescence, we see the more protective it is against breast cancer. We've also seen that consuming soy is protective against prostate cancer, because prostate cancer is also hormonally driven, or the growth is stimulated by estrogens. And so we see that when men eat soy, tofu, soy milk, in this particular meta-analysis, their risk of prostate cancer was reduced as well. And there are lots of other benefits of a plant-based diet, and we don't have time to go into all of this research, but other benefits include weight loss. We see that a plant-based diet is particularly effective for weight loss because the foods tend to be lower in calories, high in fiber, it helps to lower your total and your LDL cholesterol, stronger immune system. So we actually saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, people that followed vegan and plant-based diets, specifically healthful plant-based foods, those grains, beans, fruits, and vegetables, they had a lower risk of severity of COVID, so their symptoms were less severe. They had a lower risk of being hospitalized due to COVID, and had a lower chance of actually getting the COVID infection in the first place as well. So we see that plant-based diets are great for the immune system and reduces the risk of kidney disease, dementia, it lowers inflammation, improves arthritis symptoms. A lot of those top 10 causes of death that we spoke about earlier can be reduced by a plant-based diet. And each of these could be a lecture in and of themselves, so we're always happy to come back and do more on these different topics, but just to give you a taste of some of the science behind plant-based diets. So really, the power is in what you put on your plate. And sometimes when we're younger, we don't tend to see that far into the future, but your health 20, 30, 40 years from now is determined by the small daily habits that you do today. And if you think about it, you're putting food into your body probably at least 3 times a day with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so every time you're eating food, you're either promoting health and longevity and reducing your risk of disease, or you're increasing it. So the sum of your daily habits is going to dictate your health in the future. And so with that, what are the foods that are going to power up my plate? I am going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand over to Noah, who is going to go in detail into foods and the power plate. So over to you, Noah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Roxy, and all of you for your great questions already. There's been a bunch in the chat, tried to keep up with a number of them. So yeah, as Roxy mentioned, there are just so many great sort of scientific reasons to scale back, and we say, let's go all the way, remove the animal products from your plate. But that does bring the question up, how will we fill our plate? You may have seen this graphic already. Actually, it looks pretty similar to those of you who follow the the United States government's dietary guidelines. They have a plate that looks similar to this, a little bit tweaked in a few key ways. But we really like to talk about 4 food groups that we hope can fill your plate on a regular basis. Including as many of these in each of the meals that you eat is really a key sort of shorthand for getting towards a whole food plant-based diet with all of these health benefits. Fruits are, most people are pretty familiar with fruits. There are so many out there. Just walking through a produce aisle at your local grocery store, or even the frozen section, there are lots of amazing fruits out there to be choosing. Vegetables as well. Grains, we talked a lot about carbohydrates. Grains are a primary source of carbohydrates in the diet. And as we think about those that whole food approach, less refined, choosing things like whole wheat pasta, whole grain bread, brown rice, quinoa, oats. These are all foods that have the entirety of the grain included in the thing that you're eating, and has many of the benefits. And then the last food group on the plate is the legumes or the beans category. So this includes things like black beans, pinto beans, black-eyed peas, lentils, chickpeas, or garbanzo beans, as well as tofu. So soy products, as we talked about, are just an excellent thing to be including frequently in your diet. So by including all of these, you're really off to a fantastic start and really in a great position with your sort of daily plate filling approach. I do want to just kind of highlight, though, that there are these foods that don't show up on the power plate, as we call it. So you don't see the processed meats, we don't include any eggs or dairy, and then those processed foods, we try to avoid those as much as possible as well. 2 little kind of from this plate, I think it's always interesting to call attention to the question that we oftentimes get about protein. Protein is primarily consumed by Americans from these top two categories. And especially for someone who's looking to up their athletic performance, maybe they might wonder, how am I going to get all of the protein that I need, the fuel that I need to fuel my body, to rebuild it when I've kind of broken it down after a tough workout. And that's where the research really comes in and confirms for us the benefits of eating a plant-based diet. We're going to get to a little bit more about the research on that in a second, but there's also this huge benefit for sustainability. I know this is actually what first brought me into, got me interested in plant-based diets, is just thinking about how can I eat in a way that is low impact on the planet. So personal and planetary health actually do go hand in hand. And as we've seen in multiple studies, there's one highlighted here, the benefits of eating a high plant-based diet really do stack up. So whether it's greenhouse gases, land and water use, biodiversity loss, all of these things are a plant-based diet is much more friendly towards the planet on all of these metrics than a diet high in animal products. So we've kind of thrown a lot of information at you, and before we go any farther, I just have I kind of want to get a sense of how everyone's feeling. So we don't, this is we have four total sessions, 3 more planned for after this one. There's plenty of time to continue learning and understanding, what is a healthy diet? How am I going to follow it? Am I going to make changes? But I'd love to know, how are you feeling about on these different levels? Whether you could follow a plant-based diet, you think you would enjoy it, and if you think you will make if you think any of these changes are really worth it for your health. So far, I am seeing some positive responses, which is really encouraging to see. We'll have another sort of similar question about this a little bit later on. But thank you all for weighing in, and yeah, continue just thinking like, okay, what are the changes I could implement? And that's kind of what I want to turn up focus to a little bit next. So I showed you the power plate. I'm going to try to distill it down into 4 rules of thumb for healthful plant-based eating. For someone who's looking for that next step, wondering how am I going to make some of these changes in my own diet? What are the next steps? So here are 4 rules of thumb to start thinking about. So the first one is eat all 4 food groups. One of the things that the Physicians Committee does is research studies with people. We're currently doing one with a bunch of people with diabetes and trying to see some of those similar results that we talked about, where people actually dial back the clock on their diabetes and their A1C. And we see a lot of people initially turn towards the fruits and vegetables, which is great. They kind of fill up their plate with a big leafy salad. They get a lot of those beneficial vitamins and minerals like folate. But sometimes it takes a little bit longer to come around maybe on the grains, which grains are such an important source of B vitamins and other minerals like magnesium, and then those carbohydrates like fiber, including fiber, as well as protein, and then legumes as well. In this research study that I mentioned, I feel like one of the things if I did still the task that our research team has in front of us, it's to just tell people to eat more beans. Beans are incredibly high in protein, as well as fiber, but also minerals like calcium. So we've kind of mentioned athletics a few times. If you're someone who is looking to really push yourself to new heights of performance, you're thinking a lot about protein, how to rebuild your muscles after tearing them down. You're also thinking about minerals like calcium, magnesium, these electrolytes. Calcium isn't just for bone health, it's also a neurotransmitter and helps just your body continue functioning well, as well as omega-3 fatty acids, which are important for reducing inflammation and helping with recovery. Those things can be found in legumes. I also included the nuts and seeds in this category as well, which we encourage eating just with some moderation. So I mentioned that athletic piece, and If you ever follow, if you're ever on campus, I know you guys don't have an actual campus, but I've been to plenty of college campuses where like the weightlifting team will come into the dining hall and they all line up to get their grilled chicken or steak or what have you. But we know from research, and here's the quote from one of the studies that I pulled from, is that plant-based diets have the potential to exclusively assist aerobic performance. So if you're a runner, a swimmer, a cyclist, any of these things that require long, extended periods of output, that aerobic performance is really benefited by plant-based diets. And plant-based diets are also totally adequate. Here it says they don't jeopardize strength or power output. So as we see, some of the benefits of a plant-based diet for athletic performance is improving your weight, your body composition. It's honestly something that all of us, whether we're athletes or not, can be interested in. They fully deliver these essential amino acids like leucine that you need for building muscle, and they improve artery function. We know this from the discussion about heart disease. But even just after a single meal, athletes see the blood flow a little bit easier to the rest of their body, keeps their muscles supplied with the oxygen and removing the waste that is necessary for peak performance. And finally, protein is often a big concern for athletes, but really most of our talk should probably be about carbohydrates. So there's been a lot of studies on the ways that carbohydrates are the best fuel for athletic performance. But even one of them here that I've cited is the US military. They actually found that you really need a good carbohydrate source if you're going to prevent muscle breakdown. So we really recommend, whatever your sport, making sure you're eating a diet that's adequate in carbohydrates. Okay, so rule number 2, eat whole plants. This kind of really emphasizes the processed food component of the power plate in our recommendations. So whole plant foods, as long as they haven't had pieces removed from them, they're going to deliver some really well-balanced nutrients, both macronutrients as well as micronutrients, so the vitamins and the minerals. Whole plant foods have a really dense amount of vitamins and minerals, so that's why we sometimes use the term nutrient dense to describe plant foods, versus calorie dense, which are foods that emphasize calories but maybe are a little bit lacking or can even be empty of the micronutrients that your body needs to keep all of its systems running well. So one of the nutrients that we really see abundantly available in whole plant foods is fiber. So fiber is only found in plant-based foods. It's not found at all in animal foods. When an animal, including us, eats it, it works its way through our digestive system, has all sorts of benefits as it goes down, but our body doesn't retain any of it. So you really need to be turning to plant foods, ideally embracing them as much as possible to get the amount of fiber that we really need. So the average or the amount of fiber that we as the Physicians Committee recommend is 40 grams per day. Most people probably don't count the amount of the grams of fiber they're eating in a typical day. So to that, we're actually going to turn to the government recommendations, which are 25 grams for women, 30 grams for men. Our recommendation of 40, we kind of like round numbers, goes up a little bit above the men's recommendation, but there's no upper limit. And so that's why we say 40. So I have a quick question for you. Just if you had to take a guess, how many grams of fiber do you think the average American consumes on a daily basis? I've got a few ranges here. We had someone right out of the gate with some optimism that we're, oh, all right, a few more 20 to 25 grams. Got some pessimistic folks. No one yet has chosen the middle path. Okay, there we go. Someone, maybe I prompted them. It's a good question. It is actually the lowest. It's the 10 to 15 grams. So if you can weigh that against the average recommendation being in the upper 20s to mid 30s, between men and women, Americans are short on fiber. And so I think that's one of the things that we as dietitians and doctors at the Physicians Committee really try to tell people about is be making sure that you're getting as much fiber as possible. And the reasons for that recommendation are pretty abundant. So we'll start off in the bathroom. Stool of people who eat adequate fiber tends to be soft, bulky, and easy to pass. Also, if you're coming from the opposite end and have very loose stool, fiber has benefits of firming it up just a little bit to keep you in that happy middle place. It lowers your risk of developing hemorrhoids, colorectal cancer. Fiber is also really beneficial for cholesterol levels. It's kind of our primary tool for reducing LDL cholesterol by binding to the cholesterol in our gut, kind of removing it from the body, and it's really something that no other food can do in the same way. For people who are thinking about their blood sugar levels, say if they have diabetes and are working towards reversing it, in the meantime, fiber is an excellent way to help control spikes in blood sugar. It's also great for achieving healthy weight loss because high fiber foods, they're just more filling. You'll feel more full after eating a meal that has a lot of fiber in it. So with the same volume, you have fewer calories. It's just a much more balanced experience that works with your natural hunger cues. And ultimately, because of all of these things, we see that people who have high fiber diets just tend to live longer. And that's a really good thing. So if you're looking for kind of a fun way to remember some of the benefits of fiber, if we look at stroke risk in particular, for every 7 grams of fiber that you eat daily, you reduce your stroke risk by 7%. So this is just kind of a fun finding that we like to remind people of, let them know that fiber really is making a difference for very real health concerns like stroke. Okay, so rule number 3, limit added oils and fat. The reason for this is that fats are just very, very calorie dense. So if you're eating a diet high in fat, even if it is a plant-based diet or a vegan diet, we might call these like an unhealthy vegan diet, high fat foods can still contribute to weight gain. So by removing them or limiting them, we can move more towards weight loss or maintenance of a healthy body weight. It also helps reduce the fat in blood, keeps your circulatory system working really well. And low-fat diets, especially very low-fat diets in use in a therapeutic setting, are fantastic for preventing or for reversing diabetes. Ultimately, many of you have probably heard people talk about olive oil and how it's a really healthy fat. And it is true that olive oil is healthier or less damaging than something like fat from an animal, which is very high in saturated fat. Olive oil still has some exaggerated health benefits. And this showed up really recently in a study that a friend of ours did down in Florida at the University of Florida. And she took 2 diets, both were whole food plant-based. And really the only difference was that one group of people she assigned to have, I think it was about a 1/4 cup of olive oil per day. And the other group had a very low olive oil intake, kind of did not receive that recommendation to supplement with olive oil. The diet was sort of adjusted to make sure other variables were not confounding. And after the period of the study, the group that had the low olive oil had noticeably greater weight loss and total cholesterol improvements and LDL cholesterol improvements than the group with olive oil. So just based on a really well-designed study, we see that that a diet with olive oil, it's not nearly as beneficial as one that does not add that additional high-calorie source of food. All right, and then the last rule of thumb I have is for B12 supplements. So B12, most Americans get it from animal products, and animals don't actually make it themselves. It accumulates inside of the animal as cows munch on grass, which are covered with bacteria that produce the B12 vitamin. Some cattle also, because of their being ruminants, are able to absorb B12 that bacteria produces in their gut. We are not ruminants. We're not able to do that. So it turns out that the B12 that you get from animal products is the exact same kind of B12 you would get from a supplement. So because it's an important nutrient, we recommend taking a supplement, kind of depending on the time or the dosage of the micrograms. Just taking a supplement on a daily or possibly weekly basis. And that is a really important way to just make sure you're getting that one nutrient, that because we wash our vegetables is not available in the same way that it used to be. Okay, so I want to get a few more thoughts from you as you're listening. So we've covered a few additional reasons for following a plant-based diet between the information that Roxy presented on. I covered a few more myself. I'm just kind of curious, what of the reasons that we've covered are speaking to you? What might be compelling you towards shifting your diet towards a more plant-based one? You can go ahead and put that in the chat or in the response place. All right, seeing if you come in. Environmental benefits, yes, definitely. Health benefits. Costs, yeah, we're not even covering that, but we did a study recently that found that a plant-based diet can save you about $500 a year. So that is an important one. Weight, I'm seeing veggie dumplings. That's good enough of a reason for me. Avoid disease, health, of course, the cancer is a good one. Energy, longevity. Yes, I love how those two are sitting right next to each other. Where longevity, it's length of life, years of life, but then energy kind of gets at that life to years, the high quality of life that comes with eating a plant-based diet. I'm also seeing faith in there. There are plenty of religions around the world that are value one, taking care of your own body, but also nonviolence and a variety of values that would lead towards not eating animals. So thank you all for weighing in. All right, just gonna do a few lightning round slides here for people who are wondering maybe where to start. And we've kind of got two options. So there are small swaps that go a long ways to just setting yourself up for a healthier life. The first option is making small swaps. So we can do that with things like thinking about the meals we're already eating. Maybe you're a fan of spaghetti and meatballs, swapping out the meatballs for something like lentils or some sort of bean or legume based food alternative is a great way to start. It's small, it tastes very similar, you almost won't notice it. Another one, if you're going to start by making small steps, is thinking about the milk that you're drinking. Maybe it's not a glass every night, but maybe it's on your cereal. Maybe it's when you're baking. Swapping out cow's milk for something like soy milk, which we highly recommend, but there are lots of other great options too, is a fantastic and really easy way to make a swap. And then let's give up maybe some of those McDonald's burgers and instead choose more of a plant-based bean burger. There are so many recipes out there these days for plant-based burgers that it's almost impossible to not find one that you would like. All right, option 2, go cold tofu. This is a alternative maybe to going cold turkey, but just cut out all of those foods that we mentioned. Depending on your own situation and what seems to work for you. If some people prefer the slower, smaller changes. For other people, it makes much more sense to just make a big switch all at once. So neither one is right or wrong. We do often say that small changes make small impacts, but every change that you can make towards the better is going to be worth it. And who knows, making a small change at first could lead to feeling like you want to make bigger changes a little bit further down the road. Okay, so I know Roxy showed you a bunch of delicious pictures, and I'm not exactly sure what time zone everyone is in. For me, I am starting to get hungry. So this is going to be these are some treacherous slides for me. But there are just so many plant-based foods out there, delicious flavors that really make eating this way incredibly enjoyable. So here's just kind of a smattering of things. You know, if you're a big fan of bowls, there are just so many great options to choose from. Salads, of course, are on the menu. But if that is not your thing, sandwiches, wraps, something a little bit heartier is also a great option. So think about, yeah, maybe some of your current patterns, eating patterns, and which one works best for you. Grains, greens, and legumes. This is kind of one of our sort of go-to just meal patterns that we like to think about, is like, how can we include these three groups? So vegetable, some sort of bean, and then leafy greens. I mean, there are all sorts of great greens, but leafy greens especially, or green plant foods are just fantastic. All right, with that, I just want to list off a few resources that we have available. So pcrm.org, our website, is full of a lot of places to turn to and explore. We have fact sheets, materials and research that we've done. Fact sheets in particular are really handy, especially if you have someone who's asking you questions about, hey, why is taking a B12 supplement important? Where do you get your protein? What about bone health? We have fact sheets for all of these and many more questions and topics that oftentimes come up and are great for perusing and getting a kind of quick crash course in the information that you need to have peace of mind. We have free courses, events. We have a podcast, which has regularly been towards the top of the health and nutrition category. It's called The Exam Room, and I highly recommend it. Food for Life is our cooking class program. We have instructors teaching plant-based cooking classes all across the country, many of them online. If you are looking to go make a full switch and try out a plant-based diet, a 21-day Kickstart app. I know we've got a website listed here, but if you search 21-day vegan Kickstart in any of your app stores, we do have an app that is really a great resource for jumping headfirst into this way of eating. There are recipes, there are informational videos, cooking demonstrations, grocery lists, basically a wraparound set of supports for getting you started. PCRM.org also has a lot of recipes. If the app is not quite, that doesn't work with your method of accessing information, the website is great. And then the last one I'll call attention to is Universal Meals. So this is a program we developed largely for institutional settings. So colleges, universities, hospitals, places where plant-based eating might be of interest to food service professionals, but they're also thinking about people's allergies. So Universal Meals are all whole food, plant-based, and free of the top 9 allergens. So really fantastic place to go to get recipes, even if you're hosting a dinner party. A few people are coming and they've got food allergies. This is going to be a fantastic way to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table and can access the food that you're making. So feel free to check these out. We'll send some links or include all of this in some resources as well. And just as we close out, I kind of want to get a final read on how everyone is feeling. Again, after maybe talking through a few of the logistical and flavorful ways that a plant-based diet can be implemented, has the mood in the room changed at all? All right, now we've got a few responses in, but already I think we're a little bit ahead of where we were before, which is very encouraging to us. All right, and with that, both Roxy and I are more than happy to answer any questions that have come in that have not already been answered. I know we don't have too much time yet, so I will just go ahead and maybe Reshma, I'll turn it back over to you for any sort of closing comments or things about
I see some questions in the Menti. Is there a list of the 4 food groups we can use as a checklist when we shop to ensure we rotate the vitamins and minerals so we are not deficient in any specific area based on choice? I could just drop it in the chat.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for pulling that question out. Yeah, I think it always takes a little bit of time getting used to following a plant-based diet and making sure that you're covering those 4 food groups. If you don't get all 4 at every meal, you'll still be okay. I think, yeah, when I always recommend just doing the planning ahead of time. So choosing recipes that include the different food groups. We have pretty much all of the recipes on our website. If you're choosing 1 or 2 to make a meal, you're going to be covering the different groups, the different food groups, and getting a really nutritious and adequate meal. So Roxy, do you have anything maybe add to sort of what like planning needs to go into getting a nutritious and adequate diet?
Yeah, I think as long as you focus on that power plate of the whole foods, beans, fruits, and vegetables, as long as you're hitting those every day, you're getting the 40 grams of fiber each day, and you're eating sufficient calories based on what your body needs, and you eat a variety of foods, then that's really going to cover all of your bases. I don't think we need to overcomplicate it too much, but just focusing on all those different food groups, making sure you're getting all of them each day, you should be able to get all the nutrients that you need.
And I'll just maybe throw one more thing in, Roxy. Yeah, to what you said about just keeping it simple is, I think, so important. It's like as if you were to change your diet towards anything new, there's going to be an adjustment period. But very quickly, our hope is that people who are eating this way can kind of settle in, figure out, oh, this is actually a lot of the questions that I have about variety almost take care of themselves. It doesn't need to be an overly complicated diet. Yeah, I think that the other thing that people realize when they start eating this way is it's a pretty voluminous diet. You eat a large bowl of something for breakfast, perhaps, and because it's just lower in calories, you find that you're hungry a little bit sooner, not in an unpleasant way, but in a way of like, oh, now I get to go and enjoy some other delicious food. So it's really an invitation to be eating a wide variety of different things. So we encourage experimentation and covering as many different food groups as you want to.
All right, I can see all the questions in the chat and on Menti, so we can just keep going through them. Noah and I can stay on a little bit and answer those, and you can just let us know when you want us to close out, if that works for you, or if anyone needs to drop off, then feel free to do so, if that works.
Yeah, first I want to say thank you to all of those who attended today. I'd also like to extend a heartfelt thank you to our presenters, both Noah and Dr. Roxy, for their expertise and insights, especially into such a relevant topic. I hope that today's workshop inspired you to kind of consider the benefits of a plant-based diet for yourself and your families. And you might be wondering why we're doing something like this in like the last part of the year. That's because we're getting you ready for those New Year resolutions that are coming up, right? So thank you again. We look forward to seeing you at our next session, which is on October 18th, boosting your metabolism. And if you haven't done so already, feel free to register. But again, for those of you who do have questions and want to hear about the answers to these questions in the chat, feel free to hang around, and Noah and Roxy will address those.
All right, perfect. So I can just run through these questions that we have as long as people are still online, and then I'll include you when there's a question relevant. So let's just run through a couple of them. Are canned foods processed or highly processed? Is it better to get dry beans or to make your own beans, for example, your own refried beans? So I can say from my perspective, when you're looking at canned foods, if they have a lot of sugar added, they have been pickled or cured or whatever, or smoked, whatever it is, that's more on the processed side. So limit and avoid those. If it's something like beans, which don't have any added salt, don't have any added ingredients, it's pure beans in a can, go for it, eat those. They've just been boiled with nothing added. Those are still minimally processed foods. And eating beans from a can is better than not eating them at all. So if you don't have an Instapot or you don't have the time to sit and cook your own beans, canned beans is fine. Try and make sure that they don't have salt added, because we do get a lot of sodium from our diet through canned foods. I'll just try run through these quickly since I know we're out of time.
I'll just Actually,
Yeah, go
Roxy,
for
could I just jump in a little bit? I think with canned food, generally it's people are a little bit more afraid of them than they need to be. Canned foods are really convenient, and with something like beans, if you just rinse them off, even if they have sodium, you'll still get some salt, but maybe just don't add salt in the recipe later when you're cooking them. So definitely feel free to use canned foods, like canned beans, especially canned vegetables, especially when they're just canned in water, are just fantastic and convenient, and oftentimes are picked at the peak of ripeness, as we oftentimes say. So they're really really kind of at that sweet spot of flavorfulness.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Noah. All right, wondering how much heart disease is determined by genetics rather than diet and exercise. I've been plant-based for decades, but cholesterol is nearly as high as omnivorous family members. So a couple of points on that. I don't have specific statistics for heart disease, but if we look at breast cancer, for example, only around 10% of breast cancer cases are hereditary, meaning passed on genetically or have the BRCA mutation or any of those, whereas around 80 to 90% of breast cancer cases are due to diet and lifestyle. And we see that very similarly across chronic disease, where diet and lifestyle overwhelmingly contributes to most of the cases that we see. Which is really empowering, right? Because that means that there's a lot that you can do to reduce your risk of various disease. Specifically with plant-based diet, but cholesterol is still high. In that case, I would look at your total amount of fat, saturated fat, make sure that you are focusing on those whole foods we spoke about. As Noah mentioned, you can still be vegan and eat a lot of processed foods, a lot of tropical oils like coconut oil, palm oil. Those are foods that are going to increase your cholesterol. So I'd say take a look at your overall diet quality and make sure that you're focusing on those grains, beans, fruits, and vegetables, and getting most of your calories from that. No, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that before we jump to the next one.
Yeah, just that there are many factors, many of them genetic, that go into determining your cholesterol. So if you're following a plant-based diet, you are doing good things for your cholesterol levels. Occasionally there can just be other things at play. So talking to your doctor is always a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what is the response to the fact that a high carb diet promotes insulin resistance and diabetes? How do you respond to the fact that a ketogenic diet has improved health outcomes for diabetics and mental health? Do have an extensive presentation. That's a topic in and of itself. But generally, what we see is with ketogenic diets, low carb diets, high fat, carnivore, all these different types of very similar dietary patterns, what they do is that you stop eating carbohydrates, right? So when you stop eating carbohydrates, you don't have glucose to absorb from your gut to increase your blood sugar levels. So we see that it's almost like treating a symptom. You take away the carbohydrates, the blood sugar control improves in the short term. The problem with that is that it's not addressing the underlying insulin resistance in the cells, and that is a result of too much saturated fat, too much dietary fat, and excess calories in the diet. And so with a plant-based diet, we're eating more carbohydrates, but you're addressing that underlying cause of insulin resistance at a cellular level, which is why we see that plant-based diets improve diabetes control. Also because they're high in fiber, that also plays a role. But with ketogenic diets, there can be some short-term improvements in blood sugar control because you're not eating carbs and you lose a lot of water weight. But in the long term, we also have to look at the risk of a diet like that, right? We've spoken about the health risks associated with red and processed meat, right? Dairy, eggs, these are foods that are included in these low-fat, low-carb diets, and they increase the risk of disease outcomes. So even if it does improve short-term blood sugar control, the long-term risks certainly outweigh that. And we do see people on keto diets and carnivore diets dramatically increase their cholesterol, which is increasing the risk of heart disease in the long term. So we could definitely do a full presentation on that in the future.
I'll just add to maybe a simple way to think about it is a ketogenic diet or a low carb diet controls blood sugar on the outside of your body. You're controlling what you put inside your mouth, but you're not addressing the root cause, like Roxy said. With a diet that focuses on reducing fat, you actually are helping your body regain its natural ability to deal with carbs, which sets you up to have a much healthier relationship to food. It's a much more sustainable diet. And yeah, as we've said, carbohydrates are have so many great health benefits that having access to that well-balanced diet is really important. For people who have epilepsy, that is the one sort of exception where a ketogenic diet might be a good idea. But that is not nearly as many people as are currently following the diet. So we do recommend, yes, looking at the research and sort of considering what makes most sense for you, which we generally say is a well-balanced plant-based diet.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I see there have been 2 hands that have come up. So let me just quickly finish the questions in Menti, and then I think we can go to in-person questions if there's still time. Isn't bread processed? Absolutely, it does. It is processed. And as I mentioned on that scale, we want to focus on the less processed foods, generally speaking. If it's something like whole grain bread, where it's made from whole grains, right? It's not like a white bread that's been refined and had all of that pulp and all of that extracted from the actual wheat before it gets made. Then we do see that whole grain breads, even though it is more processed, it's definitely healthier than, for example, a white bread. So focus on getting as much minimally processed foods as possible. You can include something like a bit of whole grain bread in a healthful diet. And I know there was a question about psyllium husk in the chat as well. With all of these things, with supplements, with specific foods, what really matters is your overall dietary quality. There is no one single food that's going to change your life or eliminate your risk for disease. It really comes down to what you're eating every day and your overall dietary pattern. But a whole grain bread absolutely can form part of a healthy diet. Not sure if you have anything to add, Noah.
Yeah, just that minimally, we oftentimes will say whole or minimally processed foods. So a soybean is a unprocessed food. Tofu is minimally processed. Both are really excellent foods. So there's a little bit of nuance once you get into those middle categories of processing. Some are a little bit better than others. So yeah, whole grain bread, absolutely fantastic. A white Wonder Bread is much more processed of a type of bread. So we would say, let's choose the whole grain as much as possible. And then there's a little bit of nuance too depending for what your personalized nutritional goals is. And this is where talking to a dietitian might be helpful. I know I keep coming back to the athlete thing, but if you are running a marathon, that is not maybe a great time to have a bowl of oatmeal because it's very high in fiber. You don't want all of that extra bulk in your stomach. And having a quick access to a more processed or refined source of sugar is going to be really important. So there's rare opportunities for a processed food actually making a little bit of sense. But by and large, things that we do on a regular basis should really be choosing the whole foods or the minimally processed ones.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one final question that I'll hand over to you, Noah, from Menti is, how can someone choose a plant-based diet on an affordable budget? Do you have any tips for keeping it affordable? I know you mentioned our study, but any tips on keeping it affordable?
Yeah, so just on a very basic level, if you are swapping out your meat products for beans are dirt cheap. You're going to immediately be saving money on that front. There are plenty of places you can invest a little bit more money, whether that be in more specialized ingredients or even like kitchen gadgets that sometimes make cooking a little bit easier when you're following a plant-based diet. But there's no one right way to eat a whole plant-based diet. There's many different versions, and the particular foods you choose to make up your diet can vary based on your things like your budget. So if you even hop on an internet browser and search for affordable whole food diet, plant-based diet, affordable whole food plant-based recipes, all sorts of things will come up. There are plenty of cookbooks that kind of have a budget focus. So it's definitely possible.
All right. I think that's it from our side. If anyone has any in-person questions they'd like to ask, otherwise, yeah, Kevin, go ahead.
Oh, hello, Dr. Roxy. Okay, so is walking a good exercise to lose weight in addition to a plant-based diet?
Very good question. In terms of losing weight, most of your results are going to come from your diet, right? You can't really out exercise a bad diet. I know that's what a lot of people say, but really when it comes to, if weight loss is the goal, focusing on high fiber whole foods is where you're going to get most of your results. If you want to have that 10,000 step day goal, I think that's great. That's going to help you to expend more energy, and it's good to just get moving. I think it's a great addition. Any exercise that you can realistically do regularly and consistently is going to help you. And really, if we look at health, longevity, cardiovascular disease risk, going from no exercise to going to around 30 minutes a week you're going to see dramatic results. So exercise is a great form of exercise, and walking is a great form of exercise. I would say if weight loss is the goal, to include some strength training exercise as well, increasing lean muscle mass. That's also going to increase your rate of metabolism, help you to burn more calories throughout the day. So walking is great. I think including some resistance training, weight-bearing exercise is going to push you over the edge, and it's going to be much better. But most of your results are going to come from the food that's on your plate.
Lenine.
Thank you. Just wondering, I noticed that the 21-day vegan Kickstart app is mostly for iPad and iPhones. As a Samsung user, I don't have access to one of those. Just wondering, do you happen to have a suggestion on a substitute that we could use?
It is also available on Google Play. Sorry, I don't think I included that link in the chat, but if you search it on Google Play, it is available on Samsung as well.
Thank you.
Otherwise, most of the recipes that are included in the app are also on our website. So it's maybe not quite the curated experience, but everything, all of our website recipes belong in the app just as much as the ones that are in the app itself.
Does anyone else have any questions? Three, two, one. Okay. Well, thank you again for attending. For those of you who stayed throughout, we hope that the information was valuable. Like I said, the session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to YouTube. I can't promise tomorrow because it's a Saturday, but I can't also promise next week because it needs to be edited before it goes on our YouTube channel. But once I get the slides, I will share that out with all of you so you can view them and look at the resources. And we hope that you can make it to our next session. Thank you again, Noah and Dr. Roxy, for your time and for going overboard and answering all the questions beyond the 1:30 time slot. Thank you again.
Thanks so much for having us. Bye-bye.
Great presentation.
Thank you.